Hi, I'm Sharon Hankins, an ambassador for Essential Stencil. In this tutorial, I want to show you Essential Stencil's brushes and what the different sizes might be used for. And I want to introduce our detail brushes, or sometimes we call them bridging brushes. Now, these are perfect for filling in stencil bridge lines, creating a beautiful finished look. They come in 6 different sizes, and they have a beautiful synthetic bristle and a beautiful wooden ergonomic pencil grip handle. Before we get to using our detail brushes, let's have a look at the different sizes of the Essential Stencil brushes. Now, don't forget, they come in a 1/2 inch, 5/8 inch, 3/4 inch, and 7/8 inch brushes. So with these, you might find that you have large, as in these varsity letters here, large stencils that you have a great big area to cover. Well, then I'd use a large brush for that type of stencil. This example, as in a shape, or you might find a pattern that has large areas that need a larger area to cover. You could use a large or one of the 3/4 inch brush to cover that area there. Let's see, we've got these. When you get down to the mini size stencils sets, you might find some very fine lettering here that you would use the smaller brush on. So we're going to have a go at looking at those today. So let's recap as we go some of our best stenciling tips. So we'll start with our large letter H. And again, we're just stenciling by centering our project on the board. And if you'd like to keep your project in place, use a bit of painter's tape on the edges. I'll give you some tips for using a large brush in a large area. Remembering, we're just going to recap how to use our brushes. We dip in our water-based acrylic paint, wipe it off on the edges, and then offload your brush on the piece of cardboard, working it into the bristles as you go. I might just add a little bit more brush, but we want to offload the brush until it's almost dry. But when we do have a large space to work with on the inside, you can sometimes offload a little bit of that paint on the center of your brush. So you don't want it too dry, or you won't have much there to fill in the gaps. Just going over that again, you want to remove excess, but not too much. If you may have a little bit too much on your brush, what a great idea to do is to pull in from the sides. So we're going to pull this in from the sides so that we're not getting paint bleeding under the edges of our stencil. And I like to use a swirling technique normally when I'm stenciling, but I'm just being careful right now because I've got such a large area to cover that I don't move. And so this letter has a bridge center that could be moved if you wriggle the brush too much close to it. And let's see that again. We're going to go down the center here, but coming in from the edges so that we don't push the paint under the edge. We don't want to go this way, or you could cause some bleeding under the edge of the stencil. Now I can do that swirling motion because I've hardly got any on the brush. Sometimes when you've got super large spaces to fill, and it's good to offload some of that in the center. I can see it's very patchy over here. That's okay, we'll just go over that with our brush. Remember that I always recommend, if you're really worried about painting on your board at first, stencil on a piece of cardboard first. So there's our large brush, and a great example of using that on some of these large letters, or you might have a large pattern, a large animal or something that you're stenciling. Just remember to pull in from the sides. Once you've done that and you're happy with the amount of coverage that you've got, we can lift our stencil off and see our nice crisp lines. There we go. Now let's have a look at another example, and that would be our, from the Sporting Icons pack, our soccer ball. Once again, you can just use some painter's tape to tape down the sides. And for this one, you could just choose, if you had that same colour on your brush already, you could choose to use the same brush, but you may want to use a medium brush. Now, don't forget, you can either use a damp cloth to pop that brush into if you're not going to use it straight away, or a plastic bag. So we're just going to use our 3/4 inch brush now, dip that in, wiping off on the edges, and then offloading the paint onto a piece of cardboard until it's almost dry. But remembering we've got a bit of a gap to fill, so I want to leave a little bit left on the brush, and going into the center here, then pulling in from those edges on the larger space. And then I can do my swirling motion when I've got hardly anything left on the brush, and it really does fill all the crevices, as opposed to something like stippling. But you might find that stippling works really well for you. So everyone loves to find their own best way of doing things, and that's, as with anything, just find what's best, practice on a piece of cardboard. Some lines that go like this, I just, go the direction of those lines. That helps a little bit. When you're gently swirling and you run out of paint on your brush, just gently dip it in. But as I often will say to people, is it's better to go a couple of coats with less on your brush than having too much on your brush and risk having that paint bleed underneath the stencil and cause fuzzy edges, or what we call bleed. Almost finished. You may want to go over a second coat. If you're doing a second coat, make sure it's completely dry before you then go over again. Okay, let's remove this. And again, nice crisp edges because we had less on the brush. And we've used that size brush because we had some more larger spaces. Now, if I'm going to be using this stencil, it's got a lot of smaller letters in it. So let's have a look at that. Now this one is a good example of where my stencil goes over the edge, so I can't really use painter's tape for this one. It's not going to be helpful because my stencil goes wider than my board. So I'm using the very small brush now, 1/2 inch brush. And this is somewhere where I can point out the bridges, which we would use the detail brushes for if we want to. The bridges hold those centers of our letters in place when we've got a stencil. I might just go on this top area here of the fresh cut words for now. Using the smallest brush, I've offloaded as much as I can. Then all I have to do is swirl, swirl, swirl. Let me turn that around a little bit. And I'm seeing that I'm just running out of paint on my brush right as I get to the end. Now I've just held this in place really firmly with my hand. I'm going to hold my breath so that it doesn't go anywhere, and place my hand strongly down on that again, just to get this last little bit a bit more detailed. Okay, I remove that. We've got nice crisp stenciled letters right there. Now let's take a look at the detailing brushes, and I'm going to be using those today for bridging some stencils that I did earlier. Now the stencils have little bridges that hold the center of some of the letters and hold all of the letters, in fact, all together to be used as a stencil. If they weren't there, you would lose the center of your A, for example. You would lose that center part of your letter H or K. So to do that, we want to use, I'm just using this size. They come in 6 different sizes from really tiny to larger. There's a 5/0, 3/0, a 0, a 2, 3 and a 4 in this set of 6. So what I need to do is just dip a little bit into the paint. I don't want too much because when I'm stenciling, with the stenciling brushes, I'm using that swirling dry brush method, so I don't want to have a whole bunch on my brush when I'm starting out to do the bridges. So I want to even probably offload a little bit onto my brush. A little bit is good because we can always add more, but if you leave a great big blob in this area, so if you can see that little tiny bridge right here, we're just going to close those gaps with these detail brushes. There we go. Closing the gap there. May need more if we need more paint, or we just get more on our brush. I don't want too much, so we can use our cardboard to offload a little bit. Now this one joins to the next letter, T, to make thankful. And they're just a beautiful size, perfect for finishing and creating a really finished look. Some people prefer just to leave the stencil gaps there, but you can see when I finish how much it really enhances the look of your stencil to just close those over. It might take a little bit of patience, but they really are beautiful brushes to work with. These are synthetic bristles. Dipping. I'm going to join the gap here. See that it's nearly joined there. Now, if you do go over the outside, the edges, or make it a bit wider than what you wanted it, you can always use a little bit of sandpaper, or while it's still wet, if you've got a slick surface, you can just wipe that off with a little cloth. But we're just going to try and go as fine as we can. So you would just sort of measure up your brush to see, you know, if that larger size, this is a pointed size, you could go that size, or, but I chose one of the, this is probably the second smallest in the set to close these gaps. As I say, with most of stenciling, if you're a beginner and you're not confident in doing your stenciling, practice on a piece of cardboard first until you're confident with either stenciling or closing the bridges using these detail brushes. And of course, these brushes can be used as artist brushes for really fine detailed work. Okay, we're coming near to the end now. And now we go over and make sure we haven't missed any, and I have, look at that. Lucky I checked. Here's the letter K. And now we are thankful. There we go. Don't forget to wash your brushes. These synthetic bristle brushes can just be dipped into the water and washed out with your water-based paint. Here we go. Look, all of the bridges are filled and we have a beautiful finished project. So you can use these detail brushes for artistry as well as closing your bridge gaps. And I hope you've learned something today about the different ways that you can use your different size stencil brushes.